Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. You'll find 100 of these awesome interviews in my podcast series. I invite you to scroll through my catalog of past episodes to listen to them all. I'm taking a break for the holidays and to prepare new interviews for release in January 2023. In the meantime, this week's episode is a replay of one of my favorite interviews from a few years ago. I believe you'll enjoy listening to it again, or for the first time, if you missed its original release in February 2021. Have you ever heard anyone say, "Getting arrested was the best thing that ever happened to me"? As crazy as that may sound to normal people, if you've been around AA long enough, you've heard it, usually expressed along with gratitude. I've heard my guest, George J., say it many times over the years. His arrest on federal drug charges at age 19 after 7 chaotic years of addiction and alcoholism was truly a blessing and marked the start of a new life based in sobriety and service. Now, nearly 40 years later, George's remarkable story of continuous sobriety in AA is one that demonstrates the gifts that are possible by working the program and practicing its principles on a daily basis. Overcoming many challenges along the way, his years of AA service also inspired a successful career in the recovery field, helping lots of people. Still, his work in Alcoholics Anonymous has remained his top priority. I've witnessed that priority in action over the last 30-plus years, and George still inspires me and many others with his dedication to AA and his primary purpose of helping other alcoholics achieve sobriety. The next hour and 20 minutes is going to fly by as you listen to AA Recovery Interviews with my very good friend and AA brother, George J.
I'm George. I'm an alcoholic addict.
Hi, George. Thanks for being here today. You and I have known each other a really long time, and to kind of prepare people who are listening to this podcast for the first time, who may be hearing somebody's story for the first time, that's you. What advice would you give somebody initially before they listen? If you could tell them, now you're getting ready to listen to this, keep this in mind, what would you say?
I would say to look for the similarities and to have an open mind that you are hearing somebody share their heart and soul. And if you can tap into the things that are similar or things that you can maybe grow from or learn from, would be the way I would do it.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable suggestion to people listening for the first time. I know you're coming up on a milestone this coming fall. It's amazing. Seems like just last year we were at your 35th AA birthday, but you're coming up on
40
on October. It's October 12th. God, that's amazing.
Yep.
It's hard to believe all the years that have passed by. And you and I have known each other a pretty long time now. I mean, it seems like for years and years and years. We go to a lot of the same meetings together.
Absolutely.
Which I think really facilitates a nice, close relationship.
Yep.
Your story I've heard before, and it's a great story, and it's very enlightening about who you are, but it starts at a relatively early age, and I wondered if you could kind of walk us through what growing up was like and how that may have contributed or led to your alcoholism.
You know, I was the youngest of 6 children, and I was probably 5.5 years after the last one, so I may have been a mistake. I may have been a surprise. and so in some ways I felt like I was a part of a big family, but in more ways I felt like probably in some ways the only child.
Really?
Because as the siblings moved on, it was basically my brother and I. And then when my brother left for the Air Force, you know, I guess I was 12 years old. And that's kind of when the drugs and alcohol almost started. And so for me, you know, it's not the reason I'm an addict, but I think the spark that lit the fire was that my father, who I was very, very close to, super close to, I just thought he walked on water. one Sunday morning after cutting the grass, he came inside and said that he wasn't feeling well. And I went check on him, and he was in his bedroom, and he was talking weird. And I didn't realize it at the time, but he was talking about like his mom, like his mama, and instead of my mama. And next thing you know, I went to church. It's a small town in Louisiana called Lockport, Louisiana, 2,500 people, I think. And I was walking to church, and then while in church, the priest announced that my dad died.
Oh, no.
And so it was like really, like shocking. Like you don't even know what to do when you're 12 years old. And luckily my brother was in like 3 or 4 pews behind me and had somebody tap me on the shoulder to like, come on, get out. Because I was like, man, did he just say what he said? God. Mm-hmm. And so he drove me home. He wouldn't drive me to church, but he drove me home. I guess he had a
special occasion.
Special occasion. He had a little compassion for me at the moment.
Yeah.
And, just as that happened, they say when you have trauma, your feelings stop. So I think at that point, my feelings stopped. But it opened the door. And the way it opened the door was that once he died, my mom had never worked before. She never even finished high school. And so she was a Cajun woman. And so she ended up getting her GED and got her first job. She was a sitter at a hospital from 11 to 7. Mm-hmm. And like all good Louisiana people, you have a bar full of alcohol that I never really put much thought about it. Mm-hmm. But when she was gone and I would be afraid at night and I had friends over or whatever, we started hitting the bar. Trying different alcohol. And my mom wasn't a drinker. Her dad was an alcoholic. So she had no idea the alcohol was slowly slipping away. And for me, it was that, like we all talk about, that rush of comfort. And so it was my security blanket, living in a big house, when she's gone from 11 to 7. And so I think it helped, not that my dad dying didn't have influence, but it was more about the freedom to try things that triggered the addiction to get started. And then obviously I tried marijuana for the first time at Mardi Gras at age 13. And it was like, wow, this is even better than alcohol.
Wow, so it was an accessibility issue for you too. I mean, the booze was pretty accessible to you at home.
Yeah.
And then, of course, at Mardi Gras, my guess is I've never been to Mardi Gras all the years I've lived down here, but my guess is that it's readily available.
Yeah, because you can hide it. You got costumes on or whatever. No one knows what's going on. It's a full-on party.
My goodness. So was your drinking then, did it helped with the loneliness or the aloneness that you were experiencing at the time?
Yeah. And the grief.
Sure. How long did it take you to kind of move past that point in your life? And did alcohol, was that helpful?
Yeah, I think it just continued from that moment of age 12 to when I got sober at 19. It was just a consistent part of my life. And my first addiction was sports and basketball, actually. And I broke my leg in 8th grade playing football, and then I broke it again. And so I couldn't play basketball. And so I had all these, things, losses that I was dealing with. And then so the one area I started having a little pride in was that I could drink and do drugs, and I could drink and do drugs more than maybe the guy next to me, and I could tolerate it. And it's just that junkie pride bullshit that you think you're, it's a good thing that you're doing, but it's not. Like I tried to lie my way back onto the basketball team in 9th grade. I couldn't get a physical, and so I basically kept putting the coach off and going to practice, and I was so happy. I'm in my zone, in my comfort when I'm playing basketball. It's just like the total way for me to relax and enjoy life. And so one day I was at practice, and the coach said, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And what happened is my mom happened to go to school that day for some trouble I was having with a teacher, and the coach said, "Your son's doing so well." And she's like, "What?" She said, "He's not even supposed to be playing basketball."
Oh, no.
And so that day when I showed up for practice, all excited, he says, "I got to talk to you." And so he tells me, he says, "George, I know that you can't ever get a physical and you're not supposed to play basketball. And I would get in a lot of trouble if I let you play without a physical. And so would you like to be the team manager?" And, when you're a pseudo jock, it's an insult to be asked to be the manager. So I just remember that, you know, the junkie pride kind of took over because we would go to the games late, smelling like drugs, basically cheering against our team, just, you know, acting out. And in hindsight, it was all just my pain that I didn't know how to express. I couldn't play ball. My dad died. I mean, all this stuff that's going on that, you know, that is tough, but it's it's manageable. But as an addict and alcoholic, the way I managed it was with drugs and alcohol.
And the problem is, I don't know of any high schools anywhere that give out varsity letters for drinking and drug use. Do you?
No. The opposite.
I can imagine that kind of teenage angst that you had, driven by having to be an assistant manager on a team and having to watch them play the sport that you desperately wanted to be in. That must have been really tough.
Yeah, so I said, no way. So I just... I went the opposite way. Instead of trying to be involved, maybe learning about coaching or doing other things, I was like, no, I don't want anything to do with it except, you know, party and make a fool of myself.
Knowing what you know now, all these years later, if there was a way for the George of today to go back and talk to that George that had just experienced that, what would the George of today tell him that might make a difference in his life?
He would have said, one, when his dad died, that, hey, that happens. You can talk about it. You don't have to just cry during the funeral and then shut it down, that you can release it and continue to release it. And you can talk about the good things about your dad. That would have been one, how to process that grief and to know the stages of it. And then secondly, when I broke my leg, I could have done what the doctor said, which I was trying to do. But what happened, Howard, was that the athletes would do weights 3 days a week, and we'd do like flag football 2 days a week.
Sure.
And I was walking around the track, and this coach that had, you know, he probably didn't mean harm, but he said, hey, why don't you come play flag football with us? And so I was playing flag football, and I went up for a pass and hit somebody hard in the leg and broke it again. So basically it took me out of 8th grade and 9th grade basketball. Whereas if I would have said, hey, you broke your leg, heal it, get your physical, you'd have been ready for 9th grade basketball. And so the timing of it and just the lack of wisdom, like if I could have told myself then to say, hey, tell coach that, you know, I love to play flag football, but it's not the right time. I think I would have had a chance to at least play a sport that I loved.
So there was a certain amount of, I guess, grieving that you might have had to go through over the loss of that dream of playing basketball and football, for that matter, huh?
Yep, yeah. And what happened, too, is back then, because it was the femur, which is the hardest to heal, I was in the hospital twice for 6 weeks in traction.
Oh, my gosh.
So not only you're dealing with all this, then you're pinned down to a bed and having to deal with all that's going on in your head for those 6 weeks locked in a hospital.
Wow. So you went from there to your new hobby of alcohol and drug use with your friends. Did you run with a certain crowd that was doing that, or did you do that on your own?
It all kind of started to transform. Like everybody seemed like a lot of the people I was with started to kind of transform into that lifestyle. I don't know if it's just the era. It was like the late 70s that it seemed like it was so prevalent. I'm sure, you know, then you get clouded, so you only see the people that you think party, and the ones that don't, you think they're, you know, losers. And so it just seemed like the momentum, even though it's what I was going through, it seemed like the whole group around us was going through some of the same things. So a lot of my friends that were, you know, I knew before drugs and alcohol became drug and alcohol users. And then I did obviously start to gravitate to the ones that partied the hardest and, you know, left the ones that didn't party that much or had other interests.
So you took a certain amount of pride in your ability to party as hard or harder than the next guy? Yeah.
I think it was partly, obviously, the addiction kicked in, but partly, too, that it was another way not to face the losses.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been tough.
Yeah.
So when did you face your first consequences from drinking and drug use, and what did that look like?
You know, it wasn't a lot in the beginning, because like when we'd have car wrecks, it was like fun. You know, like you push the car out of the ditch. It wasn't a big problem, and you know, obviously my grades were not great, but it wasn't, you know, like I was still passing. I think the first drug and alcohol consequence would have been, I guess, the worst car accident when I was a either junior or senior in high school. We were in, it was called the Sauce Piquant Festival. And so in Louisiana, we have festivals, names for everything. Yeah, so it's turtle soup in English. But so we had went to the festival. And the sad part about my life is that the kid who was the worst driver, his family was the wealthiest. So we always had access to his mom's car. And so he was driving, and we had went to the festival, and I don't think I took Quaaludes, but they split a Quaalude, and we were drinking all day, and my best friend had to work that day, so we were going to pick him up, which would have been great if we'd have got there. But my buddy passed the house, and so we turned on the street. We all used the bathroom on the side of the street, and then we're like less than a mile away from my buddy, and the road curved, and we went straight, and the car flipped a few times and in the ditch, and I got trapped in the back, and so I messed up 3 vertebrates.
Oh, no.
And had, years of surgeries. I've had like 5 or 6 back surgeries since then. I've still got 2 rods in my back.
Oh, man.
That were placed early in my life to try to help support the vertebrates that were messed up.
Wow. So when that happened, I guess nobody was wearing a seatbelt at the time, or?
I don't know. That's a good question, if I had seatbelts on or not, because I just remember smelling gas on me and being halfway out the window. And what's even more ironic, a lot of my life was spent working on the street Montrose.
Sure,
And the music that was playing at the time was Rock Candy by a band named Montrose. It's funny, the things you remember.
Yeah, that is. So the first major consequence was an injury,
yes.
And did you guys get into trouble for that, or was the injury trouble enough?
No, I think back then a lot of times, I don't even know if the driver got DWI, but for me, because I was a passenger, I didn't have any legal problems, but obviously it was just the problems of the physical.
Wow. So there you are back in the hospital again.
Yeah.
How long did you spend in the hospital that time?
I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. They actually had to move me to the one in New Orleans. And what's funny about it, Howard, is that in the first 2 episodes of the hospital, a lot of cards, letters, it was pre-addiction. And then middle of addiction, very few cards, very few letters. People that use, they're like cockroaches when the lights come on. I mean, they take off. and so they may have thought we were friends, but they're not going to go out in the daylight to let people see that they're going to visit their friend or send a card or, things like that. So it was like a whole series of, less social interactions. So
that must have made you feel kind of alone at the time, huh?
Yeah. So it goes back to the loneliness, and then you go back to, obviously, to the bottle. And I had 1 surgery and then another surgery, and then the 3rd surgery, they almost had to redo everything.
Oh, no.
And that doctor was really good. He was an amazing doctor, and he said, you have to stay home for, I forgot how long, and I had to wear this huge brace, like from my neck to my waist. I forgot how long I had to stay home, but I just said to my mind, I said, I think I have a problem. I said, I think I'm not going to drink or do drugs. And I really believe I was a dry drunk because I was really irritable, discontented, snappy. It was just my mom and I. I think I drank, a few long neck Dixie beers just to kind of take the edge off. But in my mind, I was trying to be sober. And then when I got out and was able to go around my friends when they were trying to pass the joint, I was like, no, I'm staying sober. And that didn't last long because I didn't have the tools. I don't know how long I even stayed without drugs. But eventually I went right back. And as we both know, the progressiveness gets worse. And so even though I might have been off the grid for a couple months, I was still off to the races.
All of this happened, the surgeries, everything else, before you were how old?
I was 17, I think, when the surgery started, 17.
Okay, so you had a couple of years before you actually got sober.
Yeah.
What were the last couple of years like for you, and where was your bottom that finally boosted you into the program?
Yeah, it's interesting. Those years were like such a fog because you're so far into it. It was just concerts and partying and whatever you could do to survive and get by. And I think I was number 265 out of 280 students when I graduated. I wasn't
Another distinction.
yeah, it was a great distinction. But I graduated, I got into college, and I tried to, made attempts at college. And, the bottom was weird. It's, that's where I really love the legal system when they, do their job, because I was dealing cocaine at this point to support myself. And I had a friend who introduced me to another friend that said, hey, he wants to buy cocaine. And so I sold him some cocaine, and then he wanted to buy larger quantities, in the ounces. So it was like, I'm thinking I'm a little like Miami Vice kind of guy. And lo and behold, that guy was a federal narcotic agent. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was sad because I wasn't home when they came with the warrant, and my mom was going to work at like 6:30 in the morning. She had progressed up to a dental assistant, and the police show up to, arrest me. And I wouldn't even dare to face the consequences. But so I get arrested. Distribution of cocaine, 18 years old, was like 1 month before my 19th birthday. And the best thing ever happened was that my lawyer's wife worked at this place called Baton Rouge Chemical Dependency Unit when he was in law school. And he came and said, look, I talked to everybody, you're arrested, they got you cold, and the best thing we can do is get you in a rehab center to help lessen your consequences. And I'm like, okay, give me a week. And so that whole week, I really believe I was suicidal. I never knew that until I was long time sober, because I was just so afraid, not knowing what was going to happen, that I partied in such a way that it didn't matter. Like, I had no throttle. It was just like full on, no matter what happened, I would play chicken with myself in the car at night. Just crazy things because of fear. Yet the drugs and alcohol cover the fear, but when there's serious fear, it's even that it has a hard time covering it.
Yeah.
And so I was there, ready for rehab, but I was just, so afraid.
So you had a death wish in the days or weeks preceding actually going into treatment.
Yeah.
What was the biggest fear at that point? Was it going into treatment, or was it the whole situation of getting caught, having a big run-in with the federal law enforcement?
I think it was a little bit of everything. I think it's somewhere in my mind, I felt like God was out to get me, that I felt like I wasn't going to live past 21, that I could be going to prison, that I don't know what rehab's all about. I think it was just, again, because I started drinking and drugging at 12, emotionally, I was a 12-year-old in an adult body trying to figure this out, and not a lot of, support. My mom was amazing, but she was, a barely high school, GED person that, was trying to do the best she could. And I'm sure I gave her a nervous breakdown dealing with all this stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure. Now, you mentioned God just a second ago. And so where was God in your life up to this time, and how did you feel about your higher power?
I think that when my dad died and the priest announced it, it closed all doors to God. I knew God was there. I was like an 800 God. God, if you get me out of this, I'll do better. And I thought he had his mark out for me, that everything that was happening negatively was, I did something wrong in my life, and that I didn't have a lot of hope. And so I didn't see, I knew there was a God, but I didn't see it as like I do now. Obviously, it's more hopeful and loving. I didn't see it that way.
Yeah. Did your religious beliefs at that point kind of support the notion that you were a lost cause, or that you were being punished, or any of that?
I don't know if it did. I just didn't feel it. You know what I mean? It was like a Catholic, small town. I even had a St. Jude medal, Saint of Lost Causes, that I was wearing. And just the life I thought I was dealt. I didn't realize there's another option, that there were other ways. And getting arrested was the best thing that could ever happen to me.
So would you consider that to be your bottom?
Definitely.
So you went into rehab. Now, back then there weren't a whole lot of choices for rehab, were there?
Yeah, but it's weird. It's Louisiana at the time had a lot of Minnesota influence. Treatment started in Minnesota, and somehow they had some Minnesota people that came to Louisiana. And at the time, Baton Rouge was an amazing place. In fact, when I was in rehab, they had I was 19, but they put me on the adolescent unit, which was smart. And they had probably 40 kids at the time, Howard, and about 30 of them were from all other parts of the country. They weren't even Louisiana people. They'd had that good of a reputation.
Well, so you went into rehab. How long were you there?
I was there 6 weeks, and then 6 months in a halfway house, and then 6 weeks in jail. So it was like the 666 blend.
Right. So you still had jail to do, even given that, which is actually not a bad sentence overall, especially if it changed your life. Do you think you could have, if the judge had said to you, George, we want you to go to AA for 6 months and then do whatever prison time or whatever you had to do you think that AA at that particular time in your life would have been as effective as the actual treatment program that you went into?
For me, probably not, and it's more of a geographic, because in Lockport, which was near Thibodaux, there was not a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was not a lot of young people. Now, if I'd have been in Houston, Texas, it probably would have had a chance. Louisiana, I think I had no chance. I had to be in treatment. I had to be 6 months in a sober living to learn how to have fun in sobriety. I had to do a little jail time to get more gratitude. I mean, I think all those things were meant for me. Like it was part of my destiny to accept recovery.
Seems like that whole, 6 months, 6 weeks in treatment, 6 months in halfway, and then 6 months in jail.
6 weeks in
seems
jail.
bad. Yeah, it seems backwards to me, because you'd think that do jail first because you've got all the negative stuff going on there, and then go into treatment, then go to halfway. What was your jail time like? Did you feel like it was starting to undo what had been done for you in the previous 6 months and 6 weeks?
No, it was not at all. It was like a Mayberry RFD jail. I mean, it was 2 jail cells, and it was actually
you and Otis, huh?
Yeah, me and about 12 other Otises. It was 2 cells. It was work release. I could go to work during the week and come back. Mm-hmm. It was enough for gratitude, and it was not bad enough where it was like brought me back. Because like even when I was arrested, it was like 16 of us through a whole raid. Like everybody was raided, and a lot of the guys were in jail when I got there, about to get out for their. A lot of them got year sentences, and they got out in 6 months. So by the time I rolled around, they were getting out, and they were like, you went and do all that rehab and all that stuff. We're about to get out. But I did feel like I had enough of the sobriety to make a difference. You know what I mean? Like I felt enough strength to be able to go through it and do the process. And there were a lot of people outside that met me through my recovery, including the people that ran the sober living, that were contacting the judge and pushing for me to get released. And that's actually why I got released in 6 weeks instead of 6 months.
Wow, that's great. So you spent only 6 weeks in jail?
Yeah, 6 weeks.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
So the sentence was 6 months, but good behavior, I guess, got you out.
Yeah, It was a year. I think it might have been a 2-year or a 1-year sentence, but good behavior, you could have got out 6 months. I got out in 6 weeks.
So did you do parole for a period of time after that, too?
Yeah, I was on probation, and then I actually got a first offender's pardon. I actually got a pardon from the governor of Louisiana.
Wow, how cool is that?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So from there, did you go back to Lockport?
No, by that time, the recovery program was in Thibodaux, Louisiana, and I stayed in Thibodaux, and then I ended up working as a tech in the sober living that I went through when I had a couple years sober.
Now, did they bring AA in, or were there AA meetings as part of the transition back into everyday life? How did that work?
In my rehab center, it was full on AA. It was awesome. I mean, I had to know the AA steps just to go to our room to use the restroom. I mean, you have to memorize the steps. I mean, they brought people in for meetings. I don't think they allowed us to go out to meetings. And then in the sober living, we were involved in Alcoholics Anonymous and going to meetings and had sponsors and all that stuff. It was really good.
Wow, that's really, I guess, important when you're just getting out.
Yeah.
Once you were out, you continued to work in the treatment center?
I was out for a while working where I was working before at my cousin's international truck dealership, and then they hired me as the first tech for this sober living because I was one of the first clients. I was in the first 10 clients. And basically the counselors worked 24/7, and I was the first tech they ever hired, which was pretty cool because I was 10 p.m. at night and 8 a.m. in the morning. So when the guys went to sleep upstairs, I would sleep on this sofa bed. And then when they wake up, I would wake up. And then I was there like every 3 out of every 4 weekends. I was there all weekend. So it's kind of like, that was my job. I was making like $2 and something an hour.
Wow.
I was getting exploited.
Yeah, well, that's cheap labor, right?
Yeah, they got in trouble later and everybody got paid back, but I was gone too long to get my minimum wage.
Yeah. So you're 19 years old when all this is going on. You're not even legal at that point. Or what's the drinking age in Louisiana? 18?
I think it was 18, and then it changed to 21, I think, once.
Now, during this time, did you have any contact with your old friends at all, or did they just kind of drop off after that?
You know, a couple times. It's funny. A couple times I went back and tried to experience it. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time being in a car with some of my friends, and they were lighting up the joints, and I'm like, no, I'm, changed. And it's funny because I remember the tone of the conversation of, we're not sure we can do what you're doing and those kind of things. And one of the guys in that car died like maybe 3 or 4 months later, drunk and driving accident. It's just, it was part of that disease. We lost a lot of people in my growing up times.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I guess that must have been tough to have to see people continuing on with that. You knew you had to continue to do, staying sober and staying clean.
Yeah, and it's so good about the sober living, because learning how to have fun in sobriety and being around other people my age made such an impact. I mean, like my roommate for many, many years was a guy that I met in treatment. We went to the same sober living. We're still friends today. Those relationships date 1982, 81, they're long-term relationships, and that's what happens in sobriety. I think you live longer, obviously.
Sure, of course, yeah.
You're not doing crazy stuff, but then you have good, you make good connections. And we learned about fun and sobriety. That was the best thing I could ever do. We played softball. We had one of the counselors got married. I always tell this story, but he got married, and they had a big camcorder recording. And so all the guys in the house, we were called brothers. Once I got the camcorder, I didn't want to let it go. It was like my crutch. And during the reception, the band was playing music, and they had all of us go up to sing Proud Mary. And I can't sing for anything, but once I got up there to sing, I saw that everybody was into their own world, having fun, and it didn't matter. And it was like a turning point for me to, I didn't need a camcorder. I could have fun and not care as long as I'm not hurting anybody. And that's what they were preaching to us. Like, you could have fun, just don't hurt anybody. And so it was like a breakthrough in that moment.
What a stark contrast to all those years that you felt alone.
Yes, absolutely.
Pretty amazing. Did you get your sponsor while you were in treatment, or at the halfway house?
I got a great sponsor that was with me the whole way. And the day I was leaving the sober living, this guy pulls up, and he's kind of got long hair and a little Chevette. And I'm walking out, and he's walking in, and I'm like, "Hey, you're a new guy." He said, "No, I'm coming to work here." And he ends up working there, and he ends up being my sponsor until I still kind of consider him my sponsor after all these years. But he invited me to dinner when I got out of jail, and to a meeting, and made an effort. And so his name is Ev, and he's been a great friend. They did a roast for me one time, and he came in and spoke, and he's just been a great guy. And so you never know how things work out.
I think I was at that roast.
Yeah, he was one of the speakers.
So you're working at the treatment center. Fast forward a couple years, 3, maybe 5 years. What was going to AA like for you in the early days? I'm talking about outside meetings, especially since you were so young. Were there a lot of other young people, or what were those meetings like for you?
I was fortunate because I stayed in Louisiana, and then I came to Houston for training to be a drug and alcohol counselor. Yeah. And so I really, really got involved, or got a taste of having fun in sobriety here too, because there was a lot of young people in recovery. I was able to go to a couple of these things called ICIPAs, these Young People's International Conference. One of them in Miami and one of them in Boston. We played sober softball. I mean, I just really felt like that first 5 or 6 years, whatever it was, probably my whole young life was really involved with sober people, and it was a great experience.
So during a really pivotal developmental part of your life, you were around sober people, and the thing that you said about having fun, I've always felt like we go to AA to get sober, but I think we stay for the fellowship.
Yeah.
You know, we are not a glum lot. We absolutely insist on having fun.
Yep.
Everything you've said about the positive experiences you had in AA seem tied to that very thing. Is that a pretty accurate statement?
Absolutely. It was so critical for me. If I would not have had fun, I would have not stayed sober.
Yeah.
I mean, the meetings are great, but I can have an amnesia the moment I leave the meeting. But when you're having fun and you're having quality of life and you can trust your friends and, you know, and the people you're around, it just is a good feeling. And I just, you know, I wanted to do better. I wanted to stay sober. I didn't want to dabble with a different lifestyle.
Did that make the transition to coming to Houston easier for you? Did you know when you came what you were going to do once you got here?
No, it's weird. I came for training, and then I went back to Louisiana, and then they recruited me back in 1987, and I never left. I was only supposed to come here a short time, and I know I love Louisiana, but Houston has, to me, some of the best recovery and options to be sober and doing anything you want to do. Like, I love sports, so we created the Sober Recreation Committee for softball, and we did golf tournaments. And, you know, I ended up finding guys in recovery that played basketball. We created basketball teams and created leagues that we're in. And it was a good piece for me to be able to learn that stuff and to stay sober with those guys.
Was that message that you were bringing into well-established meetings of older guys, how was that message accepted by the groups where there were older people that wouldn't necessarily want to do those things? Did you get a sense of how they felt about that?
You know, I felt like I've been blessed by finding some of the right meetings. And even when I was younger, I think the older people, a lot of them, you know, saw us as a novelty because, you know, it wasn't as many young people as there is today. So to them, it was like a novelty. Like, you know, some of them probably had like a one eye open, like, are these guys are serious about recovery? And some of them are like, man, really embracing us and like, so good. I wish I could have got sober at your age. And, you know, I'm really happy for you. And so the thing about AA and the steps is that it's blind to age.
Yeah.
It's more about the quality of your sobriety and who you connect with.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you've enjoyed my AA Recovery interview series and my Big Book podcast, check out Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and second editions of Alcoholics Anonymous, missing from the third and fourth editions. It's an engaging audiobook that I narrated to bring these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the first time. Lost Stories of the Big Book is available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book and in paperback from Amazon if you'd like to read along with the audio. You're going to love it. And we're back. You know, I've been doing this Big Book podcast where I read the first and second editions of the Big Book. Going back over those stories, it seems like 80% of the people there are ancient. There's many more stories in the third edition and in the fourth edition where you feel like these people are considerably younger. Even Bill Wilson himself, although we know how old he was at the time, just because of the history of AA, everybody seems that much older.
Yeah.
And whenever it was I came in, I used to identify myself. I'd say my name is Howard, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
Yeah.
The andas, some of the meetings I went to, they didn't like that a whole lot.
Right.
They felt like if you're an alcoholic, you're welcome, but if you're an ANDA, then maybe you need to find something else. Did you encounter much of that?
I saw a little bit of it. It's amazing how it's mellowed out. Like it seemed like it was like 10 years ago that the people were on a big kick about it and trying to isolate people that did drugs as well. And I think it just became more mainstream and like for me, drugs and alcohol, I think get you in recovery sooner because it's so erratic. If you're just a drinker, typically you don't get help to your late 30s, early 40s. But if you do drugs and alcohol, it'll wipe your ass out fast. So like for me to get in at 19 is because I was doing both. If I was just drinking, I don't know if I would have came to recovery as early as I did. So I think as more and more people started getting sober earlier, I think the meetings transformed themselves where the people that were just alcoholic were like, okay, man, we're outnumbered because most of the people here are on drugs and alcohol. And as long as you didn't really flaunt that, oh, I'm just a drug addict and I'm here, I think people left you alone. And I think some of the old timers learned some lessons about, trying to not welcome people that have drugs and alcohol problems.
Yeah, and especially trying to reframe it. Whenever we talk about addiction and alcoholism, it's so much easier to just say, yeah, I'm an addict. I'm addicted to alcohol.
Yeah.
How effective do you think that some of the other 12-step programs are? Obviously, AA has been around a long time, but those people who go to AA, but they don't feel like that's their main addiction, so they go to NA or they go to CA. What's your take on those 12-step programs?
I think it just depends on the quality of the groups. You know what I mean? I know there have been some subgroups that were a little wavy on their recoveries, like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I've heard of groups like NA groups that they all, like in Georgia somewhere, I think I heard about early on, that they all dress up and it's like a big deal and the meetings are strong and they have quality sobriety. I just think for me, it's kind of all universal in a sense because it's addiction and I'm, dealing with, but I think that, like you said, some people are more comfortable in those meetings. I just think that AA has been so much more well established, and it's a program of attraction. So if you're at a meeting that's kind of weak, it's a CA meeting or a NA meeting or whatever, and you really want sobriety, you kind of migrate to the meetings of higher quality. So I don't even hear as many CA meetings as they used to be.
Yeah, you don't hear about that. NA you still hear about, and some of the other A's.
So I think they're kind of merging. Maybe they're going to strength. The stronger programs are surviving.
Yeah, and it's been my experience when I went to, I think, Codependence Anonymous at first, years and years ago, that the best meetings of CODA were always the ones that had the most AA people in them. Because these are people who know what a meeting's supposed to look like and sound like and how it's structured and how it's supposed to be run makes a big difference. I wanted to back up for just a second to ask you about when you got sober and in the years since you've been sober, family members of yours that have gotten sober and whether or not your mother was involved in Al-Anon and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. So my mom did get involved in Al-Anon in my little town, and once I got further along, I think all the moms said, all right, we can disband the meeting. They're
Job
good
done.
now. Job done, which is unfortunate because I felt like I had my best relationship with her when she was going to Al-Anon.
Yeah.
And now, poor thing, she's in a nursing home, 94 years old, and has a little bit of dementia. But and then my siblings, of the 6, I'm the only addict that I know of. I know several have married alcoholics, but they're not addicted. And then my grandfather on my mom's side was alcoholic, and a lot of his kids were alcoholics. And then some of my cousins were all alcoholics. Some of them are dead because they haven't gotten sober. So I don't know. I'm unique in the sense of my family that I'm one of the few that are sober, and who knows if others have needs for problems or have problems.
Yeah. In my family, I'm the only one in active AA recovery, though the mental illness in the family, both the clinical depression and some of the other issues, have been largely untreated by at least 2 of my 3 siblings. And it's unfortunate because knowing what we know, it's almost like the combination to the safe that somebody's frantically trying to get into and they don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
That's how it's been in my family.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you about the spiritual aspect of your program when you first got in. Did you embrace the spiritual aspect of AA when you first got here, or did it take you a while to build that relationship?
It definitely was a transitional plan. I mean, it was definitely a process, and it started out where the higher power was a tree. It was a people. It was the chair. It was a lot of different things. And the best one I used to like back then was G-O-D, good orderly direction.
Yeah, that's a good one.
In my rehab center, it was really good because I was doing a process, and I'm not sure what the process was about me getting anger out, but the counselor was saying, all right, what are you angry at? And I was naming all these things, and I said God in the middle of them. And he's like, back up. And I said the name before God, and I said the name after God. I don't even remember what I said, those two. He's like, no, the other one. And I finally got to God. And he said, I was like, I think I felt afraid to say I was angry at God. And he was really good. His name was Dan. Mm-hmm. Dan said, listen, if anybody can handle your anger, it's God. Mm-hmm. And God wants you to be honest. And if you're honest and you understand that it's not disrespectful to be angry if you do it in a respectful way. And so I did some actual anger work. I mean, I remember, I don't know if it was a bataka or what, or yelling, but they got a lot of my anger out. And I don't think I'm an angry person, but man, I had a lot of anger built up. Mm-hmm. And he helped me to release the valve. And then the other thing that was really good, that was so powerful, there's a different counselor named Bill, and it's funny how I remember these names 40 years ago, but Bill had me write a list of what I thought God was, and then on the opposite side of the page, what I wanted God to be. And he took the paper and tore it, and the one that I thought it was, he lit it on a match and threw it in the garbage. And he gave me back the good one and said, hey, this is your God. Wow. And it was like, is that simple? He's like, yes, it's your relationship. What do you want a bad one? You want a dysfunctional one, or you want a good one? And so the good one has been good by me.
Well, it's amazing that demonstrates, I mean, crystal clear, the notion of your own concept of God.
Yes.
I mean, there you were able to draw up the God that you wanted versus whatever you thought God was to that point.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful demonstration. That's something I think more people need to know about when they're struggling with sponsees that are having difficulty with the spiritual end of the program.
Yeah,
wow.
As you understand it. And so he gave me a whole new understanding of what he wanted my God to be. I wanted my God to be like. And and even, in my sobriety, there have been times I've tried to sabotage myself because I was getting like so many good things happening. It's like, man, this can't be true. And I had to realize that, man, I didn't need to sabotage myself. I just had to roll with it. And God wanted these blessings for me, and to be grateful for the blessings as they came. Don't screw them up because you don't think you deserve them. He must think you deserve them, and he wants you to use them in good ways. So
yeah,
that's where my gratitude comes in.
Yeah, and for me, it was always the notion that, when was the shoe going to drop?
Yeah.
Good things happening. When's the shoe going to drop? And then one day it came to me, and I processed it some through my sponsor, the idea that maybe there isn't another shoe.
Yeah.
Or if there is, it's not going to drop anytime soon. And as long as you continue to do what you do, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something. So you're sober at 19. You're going into the years in your 20s, and let's say even into your early 30s, when most people are still out there, most of the people you and I know today are still out there drinking and doing and getting ready for entree into AA at some future point. What were those years like for you? And can you think of some times during that period where your sobriety was challenged, or you might have thought, well, maybe I don't need AA as much as I once did? What did that look like?
The biggest struggles in my recovery have always was about as an area where I'm not focused on recovery. Like every time I drifted away from it is where the problems come in. Mm-hmm. So there was a period of time I lived in New Orleans before I moved to Houston in '87, and I got into gambling with I think it was basketball and football betting. Mm-hmm. And it was like, man, I was way out there. It was like, I even went to some GA meetings, and it brought it back, and I got focused again. And I don't think I'm a gambler, but it got me to that compulsion. Like when I am not focused on my recovery, any compulsion could pop up. Huh. There was a period of time where sex was really prevalent. Uh-huh. It was funny. We used to have softball teams, and so this guy named Grant called me one day. He said, listen, I was a good pitcher. He said, we want you on this softball team. He said, but you have to go to SLA. we're all in SLA. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll try it. And so I went to SLA for a while. And it was helpful because I was probably, sober and a little crazy in the sex area. And so it's like, for me, and everybody's different, believe me, I don't want to take anybody's program, but for me, if I'm not spiritually fit in my AA recovery, I am prone to go any which way that's out there that will get me to distract from my relationship with God, helping others. So if it's gambling, sex, food, whatever it is, I can fall for those things. So I had those periods of time where I was not fully engaged in my recovery, and those are some of the problems that I had.
Yeah, I know a lot of times people say, well, if you're having problems with that, just redouble your AA program. Were there times where you felt, well, maybe if I just go back to AA harder and more frequently, that these other problems with gambling or sex or whatever else would mitigate? Or did you recognize immediately that you needed something different than AA for those particular things?
I think it was a combination of both. I think I had to explore GA and learn more about it. I think I had to explore SLA and learn more about it. I could have overcome those obstacles going right back into AA and really 90 meetings in 90 days and get back into steps. Absolutely, I could have. But I think the ability to, get to learn more in those areas and how it impacts me and what the balance needed to be in my recovery in those areas, because obviously you're always around it. I think it was important for me to explore it. And if it was a stronger problem, I might still be in SLA or still be in GA, but I think learning about it and then redoubling down and focusing on my AA recovery allowed those things not to be an issue. I mean, I don't have those issues at the moment.
It's interesting when you come across people, or whenever it is I come across people who identify some other addiction in addition to their alcoholism and come to me and say, I think my real addiction is over here, when they've firmly established that they were alcoholics. And they want to move away from AA to spend more time in those programs to the exclusion of what they still need from the AA program. Have you noticed that over the years?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough situation because they don't always realize it. I mean, not to say those programs are easier or different, but to me, alcohol and drugs will, I'll die a lot quicker going out in alcohol and drugs and doing other stuff. And it scares me when they get that way. And it scares me when people get a little bit of sobriety and they quit working their recovery and they, then they start to have serious problems and, they come back and they've had divorces and different things. So I think it's the best thing I could ever recommend to anybody is just the consistency of the balance of AA, even if you have other issues, to keep that balance between all the recovery programs if that's what you need.
Sure. Well, turning back to your 20s and 30s now, because we're still talking about the first, say, 10, 20, maybe even 25 years of your sobriety. There's a lot of time to talk about here. That's a hell of a long time sober, almost 40 years. Can you think of some milestones for you in your sobriety, either some of the gifts or some of the great challenges that occurred during those couple of decades?
Yeah, no, it's been great. A simple one that I thought about earlier when I didn't think I'd live past 20. The first couple of years in sobriety, I was like really scared that I would die sober right away, and so one day I was in an AA meeting and I saw my lifeline and on my hand. I'm like, I think I'm going to live.
A little palm reading on the side there. Huh?
So that palm reading helped. And then, just the amazing things of having kids sober, seeing them born. I was fortunate to have a great business where I had great people I worked with for almost 20 years that I sold, and having the freedom of going from being poor to having a little bit from selling the business, and then, unfortunately going through a divorce because I may have had too much focus on business and other things that took the toll on that marriage.
How did that strain your AA program? In what ways did the divorce impact it?
I think it helped and hurt because, one, you're kind of embarrassed by it that you're going through it with that much sobriety. But on the other hand, there was a lot of guys that stepped up that kind of reached out to me and said, hey, man, we've been there. We know, here's some, guidance and support, and I could bounce things off of. And it was scary times because you just don't know what's going to happen, and I was selling my business and getting divorced at the same time. So my whole life was in total transition. But the consistent thing was that I stayed involved in 12 steps, and it got me through those tough points. I had an amazing sponsor that worked with me through all that stuff.
You just mentioned you felt bad because a guy with all this time, having to go through a divorce. Do you think that's a pretty common thing for people to look at some of their failures while they're sober as being about their program when it's actually about something else, and their program is actually there to help them?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's easy to fall into that trap where you think, oh man, I'm not doing a good enough program. Mm-hmm. But it's actually the opposite. The program is there to support me through those obstacles. You know what I mean? Like it's been a wonderful support. I feel for the people that actually don't have AA when they go through tough times, because they don't have as many opportunities to share. They may have a few friends they can share with, but for us, it's like, man, I could go to any place, any hour, and find somebody that's been where I've been that I could share with. So I think it is more of a blessing through tough times.
So how many years into your sobriety before you got married and then a divorce?
I was late. I enjoyed being single. I was probably, my daughter's 16 and we were married a few years before that. So 18 minus, I was about 22 years sober when I got married the first time.
Wow.
And so I had a good run there.
I'll bet.
Actually, I thought I was going to be single. In fact, I had a friend that was an architect, and we designed this super cool single bachelor pad.
And what did that look like?
It was awesome, man. The showers had poles in them. I mean, it had a lot of stuff. It had a lot of fun things in that. And then I met my wife, and she was amazing. She's from Louisiana, and we had a first wife, and we had a great experience. And then once we had kids, she changed, I felt like. And then obviously I'm building a business, so I would say black and she would say white. And so it just got to the point where we just broke apart. And luckily, today we have struggles, but we get along great. And we all met in Colorado this summer with my kids and my wife and her kids, and we actually went whitewater rafting. We were all on the same boat.
All on the same boat.
And the guide was like, "How do y'all know each other?"
Oh, you got a half hour, right? Wow. So, was she in AA, or did she have any kind of 12-step program at all?
No, her father was in sober. He was older, so he wasn't as involved in recovery. And then her brother got sober about the time we met. So that's kind of actually how we met. We met through the guy who was trying to help him, thought we would be great together. And that's how we met. And we had 12 plus years. So it was a good marriage, and just, had some struggles at the end, but gave me two beautiful children that I have no regrets about. Mm-hmm.
And how old are they now?
16 and 13.
So you're dealing with teenagers right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Have you had to deal with any issues, technology overuse, or drugs or alcohol? Have you had to deal with those with your own kids?
Absolutely. I've been blessed that neither one of them have gotten into drugs or alcohol, but
that's good.
My 13-year-old has bad ADHD, and we had serious issues, and he's a big kid. And there was one time that he pushed his stepbrothers, who's 3-4 years younger, and then I pushed my son, and he hit his head, and CPS was involved. It was tough. That's a tough story, but the good news is he went to a wilderness program, went to a boarding school for almost a year and a half. He just came back about a month ago. He's doing amazing. We locked him down, like he can only have an hour of technology time a day, 30 minutes at a time, because we can see how it affects his brain. All the kids in the boarding school and the wilderness programs, they're from all over the country. All of them. I mean, almost 100% of them, technology was one of their issues. And so, yeah, it's a scary thing because it's so prevalent in our society. And, we gave him a phone, so he has a phone now, but I have, been able to put the restrictions on it and stuff like that. So
wow.
We're trying to monitor it. Whereas my 16-year-old, she goes to school, she's in the band, she plays on the softball team, she has a phone, but we've had not any issues with her. She doesn't seem to like video games, thankfully.
Yeah.
So we've not had issues with her.
So your second marriage, how did you find blending the families work out?
It was some challenges, but the kids seem to get along, and that's been helpful. And to me, the challenge was more about them feeling comfortable, and how I brought my new girlfriend into the world with them, and then how they felt about her. They had some struggles with my wife, obviously, at times, but it seems like it's leveled out, and they're all kind of on the same page and trying to include each other and, respectful. But there are times that you can see where she has kids that want to migrate to her, and my kids want to migrate to me, and two of her kids are younger, but 9-year-old's been with me. I've known him since he was like 6 months old, and I coach his basketball and stuff like that. But still, that's their mom, and he calls me dad. But if they had to make a choice, they would lean to her. Maybe he would lean to me. Whereas her daughter would definitely lean to her, and then my kids, I think, would obviously lean to me. So it's the challenge of a blended family. Is like, how much do you force your kids onto the stepmom and the step-parent and vice versa? And so I just try to be as open-minded and roll with it as best I can.
I was curious, and I've asked several of the guests I've had on the show this before, but in what ways has your AA program informed your role as a parent?
I think I love that my kids have never seen me drink or drug. Yeah, me too. And my daughter, she was in some, like a modeling thing or some kind of thing for her school. Maybe I don't know what it was, but it was something where she had to answer a question about who do you admire most. And I wasn't there because it was a mom's thing. It was a mom and daughter thing, I guess. I don't remember exactly what the whole scenario was, but it was something where she had to publicly say that. And she said, I admire my dad because he helps people that have needs and, and drugs and alcohol and stuff. So it was a proud dad moment, because if she can see that I am grateful and that I'm helping other people, that it's part of my mission, then I think I've done part of my job with her.
Wow, that's great. I didn't tell my kids much about my alcoholism until they were old enough to understand what it was about, but I think they were, maybe in the 10 to 12-year-old range. When did you first have those discussions with your kids?
I don't think it's ever been like a sit-down discussion. I think it's been more like, this is my life. Like, I'm going to an AA meeting, and talk a little bit about what AA is. But yeah. So I think it's been kind of hopefully their whole life that they've known it. Now, my son in the family program at the wilderness program, I was direct and honest with them about rehab, about going to jail. My biggest fear is I didn't want him to think, oh, he went to jail and, I can get away with things because my dad got away with things. So I had to be selective when I told him about that. But I think I really made an impact on him that week, that family week, because, he's in a program that we're telling him, like, you're here and then you're going to probably go to a boarding school for a while. But it's partly to make your life better. And so I used it as an analogy, like, this is the things I did that changed the course of my life, and we're hoping that we're doing this for you at 13 that can change the course of your life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That kind of understanding, especially at that age, can make a big difference. Speaking of impact, George, so you've been in the recovery field for a long, long time and have helped countless people with the very thing that your daughter, so proud about and admires you most for. When it comes to working in the recovery field, I've known people who've worked as counselors and MSWs and that sort of thing who are also in the program, and some of them talk from time to time about letting up on their AA program because they're spending time around alcoholics and drug addicts all day long, every day. How did you deal with that yourself? And then how do you encourage the people who've worked for you in how to think about that?
I love that question. So the reason I got into it, or one of the ways I was introduced to it, was when I was actually in my sober living. And they called me in their office and said, hey, we want you to read this book on becoming a counselor. You have a way to confront people where they don't get defensive. And I was like 19 years old. So I went back upstairs and told the other guys, I said, hey, they're really hard up for help. They think I could become a counselor. I'm going into business. I'm not going to deal with this counseling stuff. Yeah. But I think, they dropped the seed, and I guess when God's calling you, you follow the call, and it's been an amazing life. The other thing that's been helpful is in my training, this company I worked for was so awesome. They were really clear about it. They said you had to learn and get training every year about it. It's called the 2-hat philosophy. It's basically one hat that you're a professional, come to work, you help people, you're a counselor, whatever you're doing, you do that job. You don't share just your story. You only share it if it's for a specific reason to help somebody. So that's one hat.
Right.
The second hat is your recovery hat. Your recovery hat is totally different. That's you and your recovery. And so for a long time, a lot of people didn't know what I did. In fact, one guy one time told me, he said, do you sell insurance? What do you do? By the way.
We stay pretty anonymous, don't we?
Exactly. So I purposely, it worked really well for a long time. And then it got hard where people, I don't ever say what program I work for or what I do. It's like other people might say it, but I try not to go to meetings to talk about what I do for a living. And I could talk about some issues around what I'm doing, but it's very generic. It's not specific. My biggest gift to people is that work in the business that says you have to keep it separate or you're going to burn out. And I did burn out for a while, not doing it right, like not doing it fully. You can't tell your story so many times. You get your energy taken from you because you're giving it and you're not getting it back by not going to meetings. We had to add in our application. By law, you could do it. Not many other industries can do this, but we had to add in our application about your sobriety date because we had some young techs that were sober and then they realized they could drink socially. And so they started drinking, and we couldn't just fire them for drinking or being out in public drinking. And so we had to put that you have to proclaim you're in sobriety so that if that did happen, we had rights to terminate. Because it's a very tricky slope, because if you quit going to meetings, which we can't really mandate they go to meetings, but if you don't go to meetings and you relapse and you're working and you're doing your job and we can't tell, and eventually we'll probably tell, but if we start to see signs, then we want to pull that trigger as soon as that relapse happens. And it does happen. No one's immune, because most of the people in the drug and alcohol industry that's crazy enough to work in it is people that are in recovery.
Well, that's an occupational hazard, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Having to sit there all day and interface with people who aren't as well as those who are sitting in your AA meetings and aren't as honest and open and everything, and they're fighting to not get sober. That's got to be tough. Yeah,
that's the message. I had one lady that, she said, we confronted her. I said, look, you're having issues. You have to be going to meetings or whatever. Like, she said, oh, no, I have my church. That's a lot of times when people say that. I said, you may have your church, but you need your recovery. And luckily, she ended up resigning. And, years later, she embezzled the drug and alcohol chapter's money because she was the treasurer. And it ended up going to jail for that. And I think it's because, I don't know what her addiction was, but she quit going to meetings, and it's the exact purpose. Like, people say, I'm always around it, or I have my church, or I have this. They have all these excuses. But to me, when you're in the field, you actually should go to more meetings.
Yeah.
And you should go to Al-Anon, too, because you're around alcoholics all day, working for them, with them, and working with the patients and working around them.
Yeah. You're talking about two hats also, which kind of lends itself to a follow-up question to that. How do you keep those people who have worked for you from crossing over that line of sitting in an AA meeting, seeing Joe Blow over there who really needs something more than AA? Where's that line that keeps that guy from giving Joe Blow his card and saying, call me? I mean, that's got to be a fine line to walk, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very ethical line. You cannot be recruiting in meetings, and I know it happens. I know it, it's unfortunate, but like, say if I'm in a meeting and somebody after the meeting says, hey, I got a friend that needs rehab, and I talk to him about it, I'm not going to just push him in my program. I'm going to give him some options.
Right.
That's one thing you could do. The second thing is you could say, hey, this is a phone number. You may want to call this, these people, and pass it on so you don't break that boundary. But obviously, in my situation, I get calls all the time from people in recovery that have their family members or, whatever, people I know that to help them. And, I want to do my best to help them. But yeah, I hate when I see people recruiting in meetings.
Yeah, I've seen it happen, and every now and then I'll say something to the person about it and say, this is not the place for you to be doing that. But there's that fine line. It used to be that people just made 12-step calls or sent the person to a sanitarium or a hospital. There's so many other things that can be done in between those extremes nowadays that weren't available back then. So given somebody coming to you with a particular problem where they're having a hard time staying sober, maybe this question isn't exactly for you, but let's say somebody in the field, the recovery field, and somebody who's also very well steeped in Alcoholics Anonymous. Someone comes to you and says, I really have this problem. Do you recommend AA first? And if that doesn't work, suggest to them that perhaps they do something a little bit more therapeutic? Or do you just assess it on a case-by-case basis? How do you deal with that?
I think it's more of an assessment on a case-by-case basis. Usually the person who's contacting me is more the family member, per se, or a friend. If it's the person themselves, then it's, I'm AA first. That's my first priority. So if they've been in and out of program, I might say, hey, have you tried treatment? Have you been to outpatient? Have you been to inpatient? What's your story? What do you need? And kind of go from there, and then make a, potential recommendation to them and say, hey, you may want to consider going, do this or do that. It's just whatever I feel like collectively I could guide them to.
Yeah, so there may be those times when you're saying to the guy, listen, you really need to go to a bunch of AA meetings for a while and see how that works out. Yeah. And then we can talk again, that sort of approach.
Yeah. Or say, hey, who's your sponsor? Well, I don't have a sponsor. Well, let me explain to you what a sponsor can do for you, to teach you to go through the 12 steps and, how many meetings are you making, or, what's going on with you. And so I try to do that kind of investigative work just as a fellow brother in recovery, and say, hey, okay, let's get some phone numbers for you to call people, the basics. But if they're, been relapsed 30 times and they, can't seem to get it because of this issue or that issue, then I might say, hey, what other professional help have you sought?
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. What I love most about you, George, is that you're never shy about sharing the good things that are going on in your life. And I think people need to hear about that in meetings. I love the fact that you have an attitude that when things are going well, you should be going to meetings. Because as I've expressed it in meetings before, you've heard me say it, it almost seems counterintuitive to say to somebody whose life is going so well, you need to go to more AA meetings. It doesn't sound right, although it is right. I get that. But over the past several, 2, 3, 5 years, has there anything that's kind of stuck out in your mind that you kind of stepped back, took a deep breath, and said, oh, thank God I'm sober?
When I had that situation with my son and CPS was involved, it was the weirdest thing, Howard. And I'm going to share it just because I think it's important for people to know that shit happens. But
sure.
So basically, CPS waived my case. They say, look, it's a one-time incident. Everything's great. But the police get involved. And so HPD calls me one day and says, hey, we need to meet with you. I say, well, CPS already cleared it. So no, it's 2 different areas. I have to come in from a criminal standpoint. Great. I'm glad to meet with you. They scheduled an appointment at this place called the Children's Assessment Center. My wife and I show up. The police didn't show up. I don't know if I had his name wrong, the date wrong, but we were there. We gave the guy my information, said, look, I don't want you to know I'm here. Maybe 3 months later, I'm leaving my house at 6:30 to bring my daughter to band. And as soon as I pull out, this cop pulls up behind me. He was waiting for me at the parking lot. Put me in handcuffs. They bring me downtown. It takes 24 hours to bail me out. So I'm in there with every thug, every addict, every alcoholic.
Wow.
They had a guy that they brought me to another cop car. They met right outside my house. There was like one cop got me, and then he had to put me in another car and this other guy was in the car. And the guy, we're almost in jail, and he says, look, I really got to go to the bathroom. And the cop says, I'm sorry, we're almost there. And the guy, pees on himself. I'm like, holy shit. And it was like right right after my birthday, and my employees had made me a birthday cake. It was a Friday morning, and I couldn't even show up for work.
Jeez.
And so it took like the whole day to check out. And so I don't know if that was obviously a lesson for me to experience that. But,
yeah,
if I was any good to anybody that was there that I was able to talk to. But, man, I just tried to eat my sandwiches that they threw at you and do the right thing and to see the experience of going through that. But, that was a struggle in sobriety that, I wouldn't wish on anybody, but it is what it is, and it happens. So we just got to move on.
And an opportunity to demonstrate some humility too. And I think I remember you talking about that in meetings, and the way you handled it was instructive and informative to people who might have to go through that sort of thing themselves.
Yeah.
So we're in the age of Zoom meetings. This has been a really tough time for a lot of people. The people have not been able to get to bricks and mortar meetings. There are a lot of people running around now coming up on a year sober who've never been to a live meeting. What are your thoughts about Zoom and about people getting sober online? Do you think it is going to result in fewer people going to live meetings or more people? How's AA supposed to deal with that, do you think?
It's such a blessing that Zoom was available. I mean, I couldn't imagine us being dark. No meetings. I guess we could have them in the yard with 3 or 4 people surrounded and 6 feet apart. And I think that's an option. But I think that we'll slowly get back to the rooms because it's so important. And I hope that the people that have gotten sober this last year online feel us enough through the Zoom that when they see us in person in the meeting that they'll feel comfortable, like they're, we're taking us in the Zoom and putting us in a room and that we're physically there. But who knows? This pandemic we have no idea the long-term effects. I mean, I worry about the kids' schooling. I mean, the schooling as the last year has been probably suspect at best.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to those kids, or, the emotional stuff of these kids that haven't been able to experience just normal life. So I have no idea what's going to happen for AA long term, but I'm hoping that the ones that really have been great engaged in Zoom will feel comfortable. The ones I worry about are the ones that were in recovery that are anti-Zoom, and that when we do go back, are they going to say, I've been living my life this way, I don't want to go back to meetings, and then they relapse? Or how many of them have potentially relapsed because they had a predisposition or an attitude of contempt for Zoom, which blows me away. Like, some ways it's easy. I don't have to drive anywhere. I don't have to park. I don't have to walk.
Well, and to me it seems like, and I've thought this during this past year, is that saying that you don't want to go to a Zoom meeting because it's a Zoom meeting is like saying you don't want to go to a particular AA meeting because it's in a certain kind of building. I mean, it's like, it's not about the format. It's about what's going on inside.
Yeah, and I love that especially you and some of the other guys have said it's an opportunity to go all over the world to try any kind of meetings. I mean, when I was chair for Tuesday noon, I was like, I want to have people I know in recovery from all over the world come in to lead. And it was an awesome experience, because if you think about it, if you've been in recovery long enough, you'll meet people from all over, and you can't share a meeting with them necessarily unless you're visiting them.
Yeah.
And so with Zoom, we've been able to cross some barriers that we may not be able to cross again.
Yeah, that's been really helpful, especially since the International Convention up in Detroit was canceled. I was all signed up in the main hotel, and I was really pumped up about it. And when it got canceled, it was heartbreaking. But I've gotten to meet people from all over the world on Zoom, and who knows? Maybe I'll see them at the next International.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to just say about your life in recovery before we close things down here, George?
No, it's like the movie "It's a Wonderful Life."
Yeah.
His name was George Bailey. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. It's like, if I was dead, I would have had none of these opportunities to meet people like you and to have the sobriety I've had and the gifts I've been given. So this is all like borrowed time, and I need to enjoy my life and the times I have on this earth, and hopefully make a difference. And so pass the tradition on of doing what's best for recovery.
Yeah. Well, you've been a big gift to me over the years in AA, George, and I love you, and it's just been so marvelous to have you as a friend and a fellow traveler on this road of happy destiny.
Yes.
I just love the fact that you've not only helped a lot of people within the program, but in general in recovery across the city for many, many years now. And I think you're a real asset to the community, but you're a good friend to so many people. I think that says a lot. So
thank you, Howard. You're the best AA greeter in the world, babe.
I miss it, man.
I bet.
What's really weird is that after some of these AA meetings I go to online, especially the ones where we used to have, where I would greet people at the door, when I go offline, I go and I wash my hands, and it's kind of a weird thing. I caught myself doing that the other day. So why am I washing my hands after an AA meeting? Well, because in my mind I'm still greeting them, and I love to do that. I love to do that.
You're great. My wife even said, I told her I was doing this, and I said, Howard. She said, the greeter? I said, yeah, the greeter.
Well, I love doing it, and somebody's got to do it, and I feel very blessed to be able to have the opportunity. Again, thank you for doing this today, George. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, George J., for sharing his story, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Of course, you can listen to many more interviews in this podcast series by following this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, and other podcast apps. Or tell Siri, Google Assistant, or Alexa, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, to hear every show, share your comments, and also contact us. If you want to email me directly, it's howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.